When 12-year-old Elizabeth walked into that bakery carrying her baby sister, she only wanted milk for Sophia to survive one more day. Orphaned and abandoned, they had no one left in the world. But destiny placed billionaire CEO David Richardson in the same place. Facing the biggest crisis of his business life, a mathematical challenge would change everything. If Elizabeth could solve a problem that Harvard geniuses couldn't crack, she'd earn the milk. In 47 seconds, she not only saved a $2 billion company, but revealed $1 million fraud that would destroy innocent lives. David was shocked to discover he had found a brilliant mind with an IQ of 200 living on the streets, but the biggest surprise was yet to come. A discovery about Elizabeth's past that would connect their lives in an impossible way. A story of triumph that proves sometimes angels appear in the most unexpected places. You're about to hear a true story that will give you chills and make you believe that miracles still happen. A 12-year-old girl who changed the fate of a billion-dollar empire in just 47 seconds. If you believe in the power of overcoming obstacles, hit that like button now and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any of these incredible stories that will touch your heart. Get ready, because this story will move you from the first to the last second. The bell above Richardson's gourmet bakery chimed softly as Elizabeth pushed through the heavy glass door, her makeshift stroller bumping against the threshold. The warm aroma of freshly baked croissants and premium coffee hit her like a wave, making her empty stomach clench with hunger she'd learned to ignore. 3-month-old Sophia stirred slightly in the converted shopping cart, her tiny fist clutching a worn pink blanket that had seen better days. Elizabeth's brown eyes darted around the upscale interior, taking in the marble countertops, crystal chandeliers, and well-dressed customers sipping $1,000 coffee from delicate porcelain cups. Her torn jeans and faded sweater stood out like a scar against the polished elegance. She'd chosen this place carefully. It was expensive enough that the owner might have a heart, wealthy enough to spare what she needed most. "Excuse me," she whispered to the perfectly groomed woman behind the counter, her voice barely audible above the gentle classical music. "Please, my sister needs milk, baby formula, I can work for it. Clean tables, sweep floors." The woman's expression hardened instantly. "This isn't a charity, little girl. Either buy something or leave." Her manicured fingers drummed impatiently against the register. Elizabeth felt tears threatening, but refused to let them fall. She'd cried enough when their mother, Sarah, had died 3 months ago during Sophia's birth. She'd cried when their father, consumed by grief and alcohol, had stumbled out of their apartment 2 weeks later, never to return. Now, crying was a luxury she couldn't afford. In the corner booth, a man in an impeccably tailored navy suit looked up from his laptop. David Richardson, 45 years old, was worth $2.3 billion on paper, but numbers on screens meant nothing when his empire was crumbling. His steel-grey eyes, usually sharp with business acumen, were clouded with worry as he stared at the financial reports that spelled potential disaster. Richardson Industries, the company his grandfather had built from nothing, was hemorrhaging money. $50 million had vanished from their accounts over the past 6 months, and his team of Harvard-educated accountants couldn't figure out where. The board was demanding answers he didn't have, and bankruptcy loomed like a storm cloud over everything he'd worked for. He watched the scene at the counter unfold, something stirring in his chest. The girl couldn't be more than 12, but there was a dignity in her posture that reminded him of his own mother, who'd raised him alone after his father died. The baby in the stroller was impossibly small, and even from across the room, he could see the determination in the girl's eyes. "Please," Elizabeth continued, her voice growing stronger. "I'm not asking for charity. I'm smart, really smart. I taught myself calculus from library books. I can solve problems, help with anything you need. Just give me a chance." The woman behind the counter laughed coldly. Calculus. Sure you did, sweetheart. Security. David's laptop screen displayed the same impossible equation that had stumped his entire financial team for weeks, a complex algorithmic problem involving compound interest calculations, investment ratios, and market predictions that should reveal where their missing money had gone. His fingers drummed against the table as an impulsive idea formed. "Wait!" he called out, his deep voice cutting through the tension. Every head in the bakery turned toward him as he stood up, his 6-foot frame commanding attention. "I'll handle this." Elizabeth's heart hammered against her ribs as the intimidating man in the expensive suit approached. She'd seen men like him before. Powerful, untouchable, the kind who looked right through people like her. But something in his eyes was different. Where she expected coldness, she found curiosity. "You said you can solve problems?" David asked. His voice gentler than she'd anticipated. Up close, she could see the exhaustion etched around his eyes, the weight of responsibility that seemed to press down on his broad shoulders. "Yes, sir," Elizabeth replied, lifting her chin despite her trembling hands. "I know it sounds crazy coming from someone like me, but I really am good with numbers. Math is. It's like music to me. Patterns and equations make sense when nothing else does." David studied her for a long moment. Behind them, the other customers had returned to their conversations, but he could feel their curious glances. Sophia made a small sound in her sleep, and Elizabeth immediately adjusted the blanket around her sister with practiced care. "How old are you?" he asked quietly. 12, sir. Sophia just turned 3 months old yesterday." Elizabeth's voice caught slightly. Yesterday had also marked 2 weeks since their father abandoned them, but she didn't need to share that detail. David's business instincts screamed that this was insane, but something about the girl's unwavering gaze, the way she stood protectively over her sister, reminded him of the determination that had built his empire. His grandfather, James Richardson, had started with nothing but a brilliant mind and an unshakable belief that intelligence could overcome any obstacle. "All right," he said, making a decision that would change everything. "I have a problem that my entire team of financial experts can't solve. If you can figure it out, I'll buy all the formula your sister needs for the next month." "Fair enough." Elizabeth's eyes widened. A month's worth of formula would cost nearly $300, more money than she'd seen since their mother died. "What kind of problem?" David returned to his booth and gestured for her to follow. She carefully maneuvered Sophia's stroller between the tables. Aware of the disapproving stares from other patrons, the woman behind the counter shook her head in disgust, muttering something about encouraging vagrants. The laptop screen was filled with numbers, charts, and equations that would have made most adults' heads spin, but Elizabeth's eyes lit up as she scanned the data. Her mind automatically beginning to process the patterns she saw. "This is about missing money," she said, not as a question, but as a statement. "Someone's been stealing from your company, but they're good at hiding it." David's eyebrows shot up. "How did you know that?" "The ratios are wrong," Elizabeth explained, pointing at the screen. "See here, the investment returns don't match the actual market performance for these dates, and these quarterly reports show profit margins that would be impossible given your operational costs." She paused, studying the numbers more intently. "Whoever did this is smart, but they made one mistake." "What mistake?" David leaned forward. His full attention now focused on this remarkable child. Elizabeth's finger traced a pattern across multiple spreadsheets. They assumed no one would cross-reference the subsidiary accounts with the main corporate holdings. "But if you look at the timing of these transfers..." She paused, her brow furrowing in concentration. "Give me a pen and paper." David handed her a legal pad and his Mont Blanc pen, probably worth more than Elizabeth had ever owned. She began writing rapidly, her small hand moving with startling precision as she worked through calculations that had stumped MIT graduates. 47 seconds later, she looked up with a mixture of excitement and concern in her eyes. "Your chief financial officer, Marcus Webb, has been embezzling money through a series of fake overseas investments," she announced quietly. "He's stolen exactly $47.3 million over the past 18 months. And if you don't stop him by Friday, he's planning to disappear with another $15 million. The pen slipped from David's fingers. The silence in the corner booth was deafening. David Richardson stared at the neat columns of numbers Elizabeth had written, his mind racing as the implications hit him like a physical blow. Marcus Webb had been his trusted CFO for 8 years, a Harvard MBA who'd helped guide Richardson Industries through its most profitable period. But as Elizabeth's calculations stared back at him, the pieces of a devastating puzzle began falling into place. "How?" David's voice was barely a whisper. "How could you possibly know about Friday?" Elizabeth pointed to a series of dates on the laptop screen. "The pattern shows accelerating withdrawals every 6 months. But there's a spike planned for this week. Based on the account structures he's set up, Friday is the optimal day for a large transfer without triggering automatic fraud alerts. It's elegant, really, if it wasn't so wrong." David's hands shook as he reached for his phone. Marcus Webb had been more than an employee. He'd been a friend. Someone David had trusted with his family's legacy. The betrayal cut deeper than the financial loss. "Mr. Richardson?" Elizabeth's voice was gentle, understanding. "I know this is hard. When people we trust hurt us, it feels like the world doesn't make sense anymore." He looked at her with new eyes, seeing not just intelligence, but wisdom that seemed impossible in someone so young. "You sound like you know something about betrayal." Elizabeth's gaze drifted to Sophia, who was beginning to wake up in her stroller. "Our father left us 2 weeks ago after our mother died. I thought he loved us enough to stay." She shrugged, trying to appear casual, but people make choices based on their own pain sometimes. David felt something crack inside his chest. Here was a 12-year-old girl, homeless and desperate, comforting him about his business problems. The contrast was staggering and humbling. "Elizabeth," he said carefully, "what you've just done, it's extraordinary. My team has been working on this for months." "Numbers don't lie," she replied simply. "People do, but numbers always tell the truth if you know how to listen to them." Sophia began to fuss, her tiny cries growing louder. Elizabeth immediately stood and began rocking the stroller gently, humming a soft lullaby. The baby settled. Her bright blue eyes, so different from Elizabeth's brown ones, focusing on her sister's face with complete trust. "She's hungry," Elizabeth said quietly. "I haven't been able to feed her properly in 2 days." The reality of their situation crashed over David like a wave. While he'd been agonizing over missing millions, this child had been struggling to keep her baby sister alive. The formula he'd promised suddenly seemed like the smallest possible gesture. "Margaret!" he called to the woman behind the counter, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "I need you to prepare 2 large coffees, a selection of pastries, and call the pharmacy next door. Tell them to send over 6 months' worth of premium baby formula, along with bottles, diapers, and anything else an infant might need." The woman's attitude changed instantly when she realized who was giving the orders. "Of course, Mr. Richardson, right away." Elizabeth stared at him in shock. 6 months? "But our deal was just for solving the problem. Our deal," David said, standing and extending his hand to her, "was just the beginning. Elizabeth, what you've done today didn't just solve my problem. You saved my company. Richardson Industries employs 12,000 people. Families depend on those jobs. You didn't just find stolen money. You saved livelihoods." As Elizabeth shook his hand, her small fingers disappearing in his firm grip, David made another decision that would have seemed impossible an hour earlier. "I want to offer you something," he said carefully. "Not charity, but opportunity. You're clearly brilliant. And I think you and Sophia deserve better than living on the streets. Would you consider letting me help you?" "Really help you?" Elizabeth's eyes filled with tears she'd been holding back for weeks. "What do you mean?" "I mean," David said, his voice growing stronger with conviction, "that I think you might be the smartest person I've ever met. And I think Sophia deserves to grow up with her sister in a place where you're both safe, fed, and cherished." Before Elizabeth could respond, David's phone rang. The caller ID showed Marcus Webb. The timing was perfect and terrible all at once. David stared at his phone, Marcus Webb's name flashing on the screen like an accusation. Elizabeth watched his face carefully, noting the tightening around his eyes, the way his jaw clenched, with barely controlled anger. "Answer it," she said quietly. "But don't let him know that you know." "Not yet." David's eyebrows rose. For a 12-year-old, Elizabeth had remarkable strategic instincts. He swiped to accept the call, putting it on speaker so she could hear. "David?" Marcus's voice was warm and familiar, with that easy confidence that had made him so successful in client meetings. "I was just reviewing the quarterly reports. We need to discuss the Peterson acquisition. I think we should accelerate the timeline." Elizabeth's eyes sharpened. She grabbed the pen and quickly wrote on the legal pad, "Peterson is fake. Check. No such company exists." David's blood ran cold, but his voice remained steady. "The Peterson deal? Remind me of the specifics, Marcus." "The tech startup in Vancouver? We discussed the $15 million investment last month. The window closes Friday. So we need to move fast." Marcus's tone carried just the right amount of urgency. "I've already prepared the transfer documents. Just need your authorization." $15 million. Exactly the amount Elizabeth had predicted. David looked at her with something approaching awe as she nodded grimly. "I'll need to review the paperwork first," David said carefully. "Can you bring everything to my office this afternoon?" There was a pause, barely perceptible, but Elizabeth caught it. She wrote another note. "He's nervous. This wasn't expected." "Of course," Marcus replied, his voice smooth again. "Though I should mention the Peterson team is quite anxious. They've had other offers." "If we delay much longer—" "This afternoon, Marcus." David's tone brooked no argument. 3 o'clock. After ending the call, David sat in stunned silence. 8 years of friendship, of trust, of shared successes and challenges, all of it built on lies. "I'm sorry," Elizabeth said softly. "I know he was important to you." "How did you know Peterson was fake?" Elizabeth pulled out a small, battered smartphone, the kind available at convenience stores for emergency calls. "I've been using library computers to teach myself about business and investing. There's no Peterson tech in Vancouver or anywhere else that matches his description." "I checked while you were on the call." David shook his head in amazement. "You have internet on that?" $5 a month for basic data," Elizabeth explained. "It's how I've been applying for jobs, trying to find help for Sophia. Most people don't respond to applications from someone without an address, though." The casual way she mentioned their desperate circumstances hit David harder than any emotional plea could have. This remarkable girl had been fighting to survive while maintaining hope and dignity, using every resource at her disposal to build a better future for her sister. "Elizabeth," he said seriously, "I want to make you an offer, and I need you to really think about it before you answer." Sophia began fussing again, and Elizabeth automatically began the soothing routine she'd perfected over the past weeks. David watched as she checked Sophia's diaper, adjusted her position, and hummed softly until the baby settled. The love between the sisters was palpable, and it stirred something deep in David's chest. He'd built an empire, but had never had a family. His marriage had ended 5 years earlier when his ex-wife complained that he loved his company more than her. She'd been right, but it was a truth that had left him alone in his mansion, surrounded by success, but starved for genuine connection. "I want to adopt you both," he said quietly. "Legally, officially, you'd have a home, security, the best education money can buy. Sophia would grow up safe and loved. And in return, well, I think you could help me run Richardson Industries better than any MBA ever could." Elizabeth's eyes widened. "Adopt us? But you don't even know us." "I know enough," David replied firmly. "I know you're brilliant. I know you're brave. I know you love your sister more than your own life. And I know that in one morning you've shown me more integrity and wisdom than I've seen from most adults." Margaret approached with a tray laden with pastries and the first shipment of baby supplies. Elizabeth stared at the formula cans like they were made of gold, her hands trembling as she reached for one. "Mr. Richardson," she whispered, "people like you don't help people like us. This is like a fairy tale." "Maybe," David said, watching as she expertly prepared a bottle for Sophia. "But even fairy tales start with someone making a choice to be kind. I'm making that choice, Elizabeth. The question is, will you let me?" Elizabeth looked down at Sophia, who was already eagerly drinking from the bottle. For the first time in weeks, her sister would go to sleep with a full stomach. The relief was overwhelming. But David's offer seemed too good to be true. "What's the catch?" she asked, her survival instincts kicking in. "Nobody gives away everything for nothing." David smiled, the first genuine smile he'd felt in months. "The catch is that you'll have to trust me, and I'll have to trust you. We'll have to become a family. With all the messiness and complications that brings. Think you can handle that?" Elizabeth studied his face, looking for deception or hidden motives. All she saw was hope, loneliness, and something that looked remarkably like love already beginning to bloom. But before she could answer, David's phone buzzed with a text message that made his face go pale. "What is it?" Elizabeth asked. David turned the phone toward her. The message was from Marcus Webb. "Change of plans. Peterson deal is moving to Thursday. Need authorization by noon tomorrow, or we lose everything." Elizabeth's jaw tightened. He knows something's wrong. "We're running out of time." The urgency in Marcus Webb's message changed everything. David stood abruptly, his business instincts overriding the emotional conversation they'd been having. "He's moving faster than you predicted. If he suspects we're onto him, he'll disappear with whatever he can grab," Elizabeth finished, bouncing Sophia gently as the baby finished her bottle. "But that actually works in our favor." "How?" Elizabeth's eyes took on a calculating gleam that reminded David why he'd built a fortune trusting his instincts about people. "Because desperate people make mistakes, and mistakes leave trails." She pulled out her phone again, her fingers moving rapidly across the small screen. "I need to show you something, but not here. Too many people, too much risk that Webb has someone watching you." David felt a chill run down his spine. "You think he's having me followed?" "Someone stealing $50 million doesn't just hope everything works out," Elizabeth said pragmatically. "He's been planning this for months, maybe years. He knows your habits, your schedule, your weaknesses." She paused, studying David's face. "When did you usually discuss major financial decisions with him?" "Friday afternoons, usually, after the markets closed." The implications hit David like a physical blow. "He knew I wouldn't be available to stop the transfers." "Exactly. But now he's panicking, which means we can use his fear against him." Elizabeth stood, gathering the baby supplies with practiced efficiency. "Is there somewhere private we can go? Somewhere Webb wouldn't expect to find you?" David thought for a moment. "My grandfather's old workshop. It's in the basement of the original Richardson building downtown. I haven't been there in years." Perfect. We need to move now, before he realizes you're not following your normal routine. As they prepared to leave, Elizabeth caught David's arm. Mr. Richardson, about your offer, about adopting us. We can discuss it later, David said gently. Right now, let's focus on saving your new potential inheritance. Elizabeth smiled, a real smile that transformed her serious face into something bright and hopeful. You're assuming I'll say yes. I'm hoping you will, David replied honestly. But first, let's catch a thief. The ride to downtown Seattle in David's Mercedes was the most luxurious experience of Elizabeth's life. Sophia seemed mesmerized by the smooth ride and quiet interior, her blue eyes wide as she took in the leather seats and polished surfaces. Elizabeth tried not to stare at the city passing by through tinted windows. But everything looked different from inside a car that cost more than most people made in a year. Tell me about your mother, David said quietly as they navigated through traffic. Elizabeth's expression softened. Sarah. She was a nurse at Seattle General. She worked double shifts to pay for her nursing degree, and she was studying to become a physician's assistant when she got pregnant with Sophia. Elizabeth paused, her voice catching slightly. She said Sophia was going to be her miracle baby, the one who would complete our family. And your father? Tom Parker. He was a good man when Mom was alive, funny, kind, always fixing things around our apartment. But when Sophia was born and Mom didn't, Elizabeth shrugged. Some people break when the world gets too heavy. He started drinking, stopped going to work, stopped talking to us. One morning I woke up and he was just gone. David's hands tightened on the steering wheel. He thought about his own childhood. Raised by a single mother after his father's death. But at least he'd had stability, resources, a future that seemed secure. Elizabeth had faced challenges that would have crushed most adults. You never gave up, he observed. I couldn't, Elizabeth said simply. Sophia needed me when you're all someone has in the world. Giving up isn't an option. They pulled into the underground garage of the Richardson building, a 40-story glass tower that housed the company's headquarters. David had built this empire from the foundation his grandfather had laid, but he'd never felt the weight of that responsibility as keenly as he did now. Watching Elizabeth carefully lift Sophia from her car seat, the workshop was exactly as David remembered it, cluttered with old equipment, filing cabinets full of his grandfather's papers, and a workbench that had seen decades of use. Elizabeth looked around with interest, noting the framed photographs of the company's early days. When James Richardson had started with nothing but determination and a brilliant mind. He would have liked you, David said, following her gaze to a photo of his grandfather. He built all this. Started with a single truck and a contract to deliver machine parts. By the time he died, Richardson Industries was worth $100 million. David's voice carried pride and sadness. He always said the key to success was finding people smarter than yourself and trusting them completely. Elizabeth set Sophia's carrier on the workbench and pulled out her phone. Smart man. Too bad Webb took advantage of that philosophy. For the next 20 minutes, Elizabeth worked with an intensity that amazed David. She cross-referenced bank records, traced transfer patterns, and built a comprehensive picture of Webb's theft that was more detailed than anything his security team had produced. Here, she said finally, turning the phone toward David. Webb's been using a shell company called Pacific Investment Solutions to funnel money into offshore accounts. But he made one crucial mistake. What? Elizabeth's smile was sharp with satisfaction. He used his real Social Security number when he opened the accounts. The transfers can be traced directly back to him, and She paused dramatically. He's planning to make the final transfer at 11:47 a.m. tomorrow, not noon. The 11:47 timing is specific. It's designed to avoid the automated security scan that runs at exactly noon. David stared at the evidence she'd compiled. How did you figure out the exact time? Pattern recognition. Every transfer he's made has been timed to avoid your security protocols. But there's a 17-minute window each day when the system updates and verification is delayed. He's been using that window for months. David felt a surge of admiration that was quickly followed by concern. Elizabeth, what you've uncovered. This is enough to send Webb to prison for decades, but it also makes you a key witness, if he realizes what you know. Before Elizabeth could respond, Sophia began crying. Not her usual fussy sounds, but sharp, distressed wails that echoed through the workshop. Elizabeth immediately went to her sister, but the crying only intensified. "She's burning up," Elizabeth said, her voice tight with panic as she felt Sophia's forehead. "She has a fever, a high one." David saw the terror in Elizabeth's eyes and felt his heart clench. After everything this remarkable girl had been through, after solving his impossible problem and potentially saving his company. Her baby sister was getting sick. "We need to get her to a hospital," David said, already reaching for his keys. "Now." But as they prepared to leave, Elizabeth's phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. "I know what you've been doing. Stop now, or the baby gets hurt." The workshop suddenly felt very cold and very dangerous. The threatening message glowed on Elizabeth's phone screen like a venomous snake. David felt the temperature in the workshop drop as the implications hit him. Marcus Webb wasn't just a thief. He was desperate enough to threaten a sick baby. "How did he get your number?" David asked, his voice tight with controlled fury. Elizabeth's face had gone pale, but her mind was still working. "I applied for jobs online using this phone. My information is probably in a dozen databases. If Webb has been monitoring your communications, tracking down anyone you've been in contact with." She trailed off, looking down at Sophia, whose cries had softened to weak whimpers. "We need to get her to a hospital, but if we leave now, he could disappear with the money," David finished. He ran his hands through his hair, torn between protecting this family he'd just found and saving the company that employed thousands. There has to be another way. Elizabeth suddenly straightened, her eyes bright with an idea. "There is. But you're going to have to trust me completely. What do you need? Your phone, your laptop, and 15 minutes. Elizabeth was already moving, gently lifting Sophia from her carrier, despite the baby's fever. "And I need you to call your head of security. Tell him to meet us at Seattle Children's Hospital in exactly 37 minutes. Not a second before. Elizabeth, what are you planning?" She looked up at him with eyes that held both vulnerability and fierce determination. "I'm going to give Webb exactly what he wants and use it to destroy him. But first, we save Sophia." The drive to Seattle Children's Hospital was the longest 20 minutes of David's life. Sophia's breathing had become labored, and Elizabeth held her sister with a gentleness that broke his heart. Despite the crisis, Elizabeth's mind continued working, her fingers flying across David's laptop as she implemented whatever plan she'd conceived. "Almost done," she murmured, not looking up from the screen. "Webb thinks he's been so careful, but desperation makes people stupid. He just made the biggest mistake of his life." "What mistake?" "He threatened us directly. That message creates a digital trail that connects him to intimidation and extortion charges." Elizabeth's smile was grim. "But more importantly, it gave me access to his real location." David's phone rang. Marcus Webb again. "Don't answer it yet," Elizabeth said quickly. "Let it ring 3 more times, then answer on speaker. Sound worried but not panicked. Tell him you're having second thoughts about the Peterson deal." David followed her instructions exactly. When Webb's voice filled the car, it carried a nervous energy that hadn't been there before. "David, I've been thinking about our conversation. Maybe we should postpone the Peterson acquisition. The market's been volatile." "Actually, Marcus, I agree," David said, following Elizabeth's script. "I'm at the hospital right now. Family emergency. Can we push everything back until next week?" The pause was telling. "Hospital, is everything all right?" "Just some routine tests. Nothing serious." David caught Elizabeth's eye in the rearview mirror. She held up her phone, showing him a map with a blinking red dot. Somehow, she was tracking Webb's location in real time. Of course," Webb said, but his voice carried relief that confirmed Elizabeth's suspicions. "Take all the time you need. Family first, right?" After ending the call, David stared at Elizabeth in amazement. "How are you tracking him?" "When he sent that threatening message, I sent him a reply with an embedded tracking pixel. Anyone desperate enough to threaten a baby is stupid enough to click on what looks like a scared response." Elizabeth's expression was cold with calculation. "He's at his house in Bellevue, probably packing. He thinks he's bought himself time to escape." They arrived at the hospital, and within minutes Sophia was being examined by Dr. Jennifer Martinez, a pediatrician who took one look at the baby's symptoms and immediately ordered tests. "She has an ear infection that's developed into a mild case of pneumonia," Dr. Martinez explained gently. "Nothing life-threatening, but she needs antibiotics and monitoring. We'll want to keep her overnight." Elizabeth sagged with relief. The fear that had been driving her finally easing. David put a comforting hand on her shoulder, feeling the fragile bones beneath her worn sweater. "She's going to be fine," he said softly. "You both are." But their moment of relief was interrupted by the arrival of Detective Sarah Chen and David's head of security, James Morrison. Elizabeth had orchestrated the timing perfectly. Webb's location was confirmed, the evidence was compiled, and Sophia was safe. "Mr. Richardson," Detective Chen said, "we received your call about suspected embezzlement. Do you have evidence?" Elizabeth stepped forward, still holding Sophia but with a confidence that commanded attention. "I have everything you need to arrest Marcus Webb and recover the stolen money, but we need to move fast. He's planning to run." For the next 10 minutes, Elizabeth presented her findings with the precision of a seasoned prosecutor. Bank records, transfer patterns, offshore accounts, fake companies. All of it laid out in a comprehensive case that left no room for doubt. Detective Chen stared at the 12-year-old girl with undisguised amazement. "This is extraordinary. How did you compile all this?" "Numbers don't lie," Elizabeth said simply, "and thieves always think they're smarter than they are." James Morrison was already coordinating with federal agents to freeze Webb's accounts and issue arrest warrants. The man who had betrayed David's trust for millions was about to discover that his greatest mistake had been underestimating a homeless girl with a brilliant mind. As the adults rushed off to execute the takedown, David stayed with Elizabeth and Sophia in the hospital room. The baby was sleeping peacefully, her breathing already easier after the first dose of antibiotics. "It's over," David said quietly. "Webb's finished, the money will be recovered, and Sophia's going to be fine." Elizabeth nodded, but her expression was thoughtful. "Mr. Richardson, David, about your offer to adopt us. Have you decided?" Elizabeth looked down at her sleeping sister, then back at the man who had shown them more kindness in one day than they'd received in months. "I have one condition," she said seriously. David's heart sank. "What is it?" Elizabeth's serious expression cracked into a smile that lit up the entire room. "Can we keep our last name as part of our new one? Elizabeth Parker Richardson has a nice ring to it, don't you think?" David felt tears he hadn't shed in years blur his vision. "I think it sounds perfect." Outside the hospital window, Seattle's skyline glittered in the evening light. Somewhere in that city, Marcus Webb was about to face justice for his crimes. But in the small hospital room, something much more important was happening. A family was being born, and Elizabeth Parker Richardson was just getting started. 3 weeks after Marcus Webb's arrest, Elizabeth Parker Richardson stood in her new home's marble foyer, still amazed by the transformation. The Richardson estate sprawled across waterfront property with gardens and Puget Sound views that took her breath away daily. "Adoption papers are finalized," David announced, entering with legal documents and a warm smile. "Elizabeth and Sophia Parker Richardson, it's official." "I keep expecting to wake up," Elizabeth admitted, tracing her new name wonderingly. David led her to a wing she'd never explored, stopping at mahogany double doors. "What I'm showing you might be overwhelming, but you deserve the truth about who you are." The revealed room stunned her, floor-to-ceiling bookshelves filled with mathematics texts, computer workstations, and photographs covering one wall of a familiar-looking woman. "David," Elizabeth whispered, approaching the photos, "she looks like you," he finished quietly. "Meet Dr. Catherine Richardson Parker, my sister." Elizabeth's world spun. "Your sister? That would make me. My niece. And Sophia too." The photographs showed a woman with Elizabeth's brown eyes and determined expression. "Catherine Richardson until she married your father. She was a mathematical prodigy like you, 3 PhDs by 25. Working on breakthrough artificial intelligence research." Elizabeth's hands trembled picking up a photo. "But my mother was Sarah, a nurse." David's expression pained. "I think she changed her identity after our falling out 12 years ago. We said unforgivable things about family versus research priorities." Elizabeth studied the computer workstations, recognizing brilliance beyond her understanding. She gave up everything: research, family, her name. "She was working on the Parker theorem," David explained. "Mathematical proof that could revolutionize artificial intelligence and human consciousness. She was close to breakthrough when we fought." Elizabeth's fingers traced equations on screens. "She never stopped working. Those notebooks I thought were medical notes were mathematical proofs and research data. Do you still have them?" "Storage locker downtown. I paid 6 months advance." The implications staggered David. Catherine's final research still existed, and Elizabeth might be the only person capable of understanding it. "We need those notebooks," David said urgently. "If your mother continued her work, it could be worth billions and help millions." But neither noticed the black sedan parked across from their estate for 3 days, or the telephoto lens pointed at their door. Someone else wanted the Parker theorem and would go to extraordinary lengths to obtain it. The downtown storage facility held forgotten dreams in metal units. Elizabeth led David to Unit 247, hands shaking as she worked the combination lock. "I haven't been here since renting it," she admitted. "I was terrified someone would steal Mom's work." 7 notebooks, carefully wrapped in plastic, drew their attention immediately. Elizabeth lifted the first reverently, revealing dense mathematical notation in precise handwriting. "This is incredible," Elizabeth breathed, scanning formulas. She was so close to solving everything. Close to what? Creating a mathematical model for human consciousness, understanding how intelligence emerges from complexity. This could revolutionize artificial intelligence, medical treatment for brain injuries, maybe our understanding of humanity itself. David felt a chill. Work like this. People would kill for it. That's why she disappeared. And changed her name. Someone realized how valuable her research was. Loading notebooks into David's car, Elizabeth noticed a black sedan at the facility entrance. Same make and model she'd seen everywhere they'd been recently. "David, we're being followed." The drive home was tense, David taking unnecessary turns to confirm surveillance. The sedan maintained professional distance, suggesting serious resources behind it. Inside the mansion, Sophia played happily with Mrs. Chen, their military-trained nanny. Elizabeth felt protective surge seeing her sister, blissfully unaware of dangerous forces swirling around them. "Mrs. Chen, take Sophia to the safe room until I give all clear," David said carefully. In David's study, they spread her mother's notebooks across the massive oak desk. The research was even more extraordinary than initially realized. Catherine had been developing practical applications that could change the world. "Look," Elizabeth said, pointing to equations. She wasn't just modeling consciousness. She was figuring out how to enhance it. Enhancement how? Help brain-damage victims recover memories, assist learning disabilities, expand human intelligence itself. The implications were staggering. Catherine hadn't just researched artificial intelligence, she'd pioneered human intelligence augmentation. A soft chime indicated someone at the front gate. David's security monitor showed two men in dark suits with federal credentials, but Elizabeth's sharp eyes caught something chilling. "David, look at their hands." Both men wore identical rings with distinctive symbols, stylized double helixes. "That's not government," Elizabeth said with certainty. "I've seen it in Mum's notebooks. She drew it whenever writing about people pressuring her to weaponize research." David's face paled. "The Helix Group, shadow organization that recruits brilliant scientists, forces them to work on projects pushing ethical boundaries." The front door chimed insistently. Elizabeth clutched her mother's notebook, feeling the weight of inherited legacy. "We have to run," she said quietly. But Elizabeth surprised them by walking to David's computer, typing rapidly. "Fighting back," she said grimly. "Mom spent 12 years running. I won't spend my life looking over my shoulder." Her fingers flew across the keyboard. "Accessing databases, tracing financial records, unraveling the Helix Group mystery. If they want war, they're about to discover they picked a fight with the wrong family." The front door exploded inward, just as Elizabeth hit enter. Splintering wood echoed through the mansion as Elizabeth uploaded devastating Helix Group financial data to news organizations and government watchdogs worldwide. "Move!" David shouted, grabbing notebooks while Elizabeth snatched her laptop. They raced through corridors as heavy footsteps pursued them. The safe room sealed behind them with satisfying steel thuds. Elizabeth finally breathed, surveying the space with security monitors, communication equipment, and weeks of supplies. "Sophia," Elizabeth called. Relief flooded through her as Mrs. Chen appeared with the baby, who found their underground adventure amusing. "House is secure, Mrs. Chen reported calmly. "All defensive protocols activated." Elizabeth focused on security monitors, watching systematic way Helix agents moved through their home. "They're professionals," she observed. "Military training, but they're not here to hurt us. See how carefully they're searching? They want the research intact." "That's supposed to comfort me?" David asked grimly. "It means we have leverage. They need us alive because notebooks alone aren't enough." Elizabeth opened her mother's notebooks, pointing to subtle markings throughout pages. Mom was paranoid but brilliant. "These contain most research, but crucial connections are coded." "Coded how?" Family references," Elizabeth said excitedly. "She writes about Elizabeth's birthday theorem and Sophia's lullaby sequence. She embedded key elements in personal memories only family members would understand." Mrs. Chen reported agents had found David's study and were photographing everything. "They'll have copies within minutes." "Good," Elizabeth said, surprising everyone. Without family context, personal references, emotional connections Mom built into her work, those notebooks are just incomplete mathematics. "You're saying the real key isn't in notebooks?" "It's in us," Elizabeth confirmed. "In our memories, experiences, understanding of who Mom really was. She made us part of it." On monitors, they watched the lead agent speaking frustratedly into communication devices. Notebooks were valuable, but something was missing. Elizabeth turned to communication equipment. "David, Contact Dr. Michael Torres at MIT. He was Mom's research partner. The conversation that followed was later described by Dr. Torres as the most remarkable intellectual exchange of his career. Elizabeth demonstrated complete understanding of her mother's framework and revealed connections Catherine hadn't fully realized. Your mother's work was brilliant, but what you're describing is revolutionary, Dr. Torres said with awe. With right applications, Parker theorem could help millions with neurological conditions, or be weaponized to control minds, Elizabeth replied soberly. That's why Mom ran. Elizabeth's plan was bold. Dr. Torres would help her complete and publish her mother's research openly, making it available to the entire scientific community. Once public domain, Helix Group would lose their primary motivation. You'll give up potentially billions in patent rights, Dr. Torres warned. Good, Elizabeth said firmly. Mom wanted to help people. If we keep it secret, it dies with us. If we share it, it lives forever. On monitors, they watched Helix agents withdraw frustratedly. They had what they'd come for, but knew it wasn't complete. They'll be back, Mrs. Chen observed. Not if we move fast enough, Elizabeth replied, already contacting scientific journals worldwide. By tomorrow morning, Parker theorem will be public knowledge. But none noticed the advanced listening device one agent had left behind. Helix Group hadn't given up. They were changing tactics. The next morning brought devastating news. Elizabeth woke to David pacing, phone pressed to his ear in urgent tones. Publishing the Parker theorem had made international headlines, but consequences were complex. That was Dr. Torres, David said. Your mother's research caused a sensation. 3 universities want immediate funding, and the Nobel Committee is discussing recognition. Elizabeth felt pride, but David's expression warned of more. What's the bad news? Helix Group has gone public. They've filed claims asserting Catherine's research was developed using stolen government resources, demanding all materials be turned over for national security review. Elizabeth's blood ran cold. They're trying to steal Mom's work legally. Worse, they've filed kidnapping charges against me, claiming I abducted you from your legal guardian. They produced documentation showing Thomas Parker signed custody papers 3 days ago. Elizabeth stared in shock, but Dad abandoned us months ago. If Helix Group could produce her father, or convince courts they had legal authority, their entire new life could disappear. We need to see those documents, Elizabeth said, mind working. If Dad really signed them, there will be inconsistencies. His handwriting, decision-making patterns, everything changed with months of drinking. Mrs. Chen, monitoring news feeds, looked up with concern. Stories are evolving rapidly. Some outlets portray Mr. Richardson as a wealthy man who took advantage of homeless children. Elizabeth scanned headlines ranging from inspiring to devastating. Billionaire saves genius orphans competed with custody battle over $10 billion research. They're claiming Mum stole research from a classified government project, she said, pointing to a troubling article. The secure communication system chimed. Dr. Torres appeared on screen, agitated. Elizabeth, we have a problem. The federal government issued a court order requiring all Parker theorem research be turned over to a classified review board. Several universities have complied. Who's on this board? Elizabeth asked, suspecting she knew. That's classified, but the lead scientific advisor is Dr. Marcus Helix, founder of the organization Pursuing Your Family. The Helix Group had effectively taken control of the legal system regarding her mother's research. Using handwriting analysis techniques from her mother's forensics textbooks, they identified multiple inconsistencies in her father's supposed signature, suggesting forgery. This is excellent work, Dr. Torres said. But proving forgery won't stop them. Helix Group has too much influence. Then we change the game entirely, Elizabeth replied, determination set in her young face. We give them something they want more than Mom's research. What could they possibly want more? Proof they've been operating illegally for years, financial records, classified documents, evidence of coercion and intimidation. Elizabeth, no, David interrupted. These people have killed to protect secrets. And they'll keep killing unless someone stops them, Elizabeth replied firmly. Mom spent 12 years running and died alone, unable to complete work that could have helped millions. Elizabeth began the most audacious hacking attempt in corporate history. What she uncovered would eventually lead to congressional hearings and the largest corporate criminal prosecution in American history. What you've compiled could destroy them completely, Dr. Torres said during check-ins. But it's also enough to make you the most wanted hacker in the world. I'm not a hacker, Elizabeth replied with a slight smile. I'm a mathematician. I just followed numbers to their logical conclusion. But as Elizabeth prepared to release her devastating exposé, urgent alerts appeared on security monitors. A convoy of black vehicles approached the estate. They know what you've found, David said grimly. We need to evacuate now. Elizabeth was still typing, racing to complete the upload that would change everything. Just 30 more seconds. Helicopter sounds filled the air, and David realized 30 seconds might be 29 too many. Helicopters circled the Richardson estate as Elizabeth's fingers flew across the keyboard. 23 seconds remaining. The evidence she'd compiled was streaming to news organizations and law enforcement agencies across 6 countries. 15 seconds, she announced, voice steady despite chaos. David coordinated with Mrs. Chen to prepare for evacuation, while Sophia played peacefully, blissfully unaware her future hung in the balance. Upload complete, Elizabeth announced, as power flickered and died. Emergency lighting kicked in, bathing the room in red glow. On security monitors, heavily armed agents surrounded the mansion with military precision. They've cut external communications, Mrs. Chen reported, but backup systems are functional. Elizabeth clutched her mother's notebooks while David gathered supplies. 4 weeks ago she'd been homeless, begging for formula. Now she was center of an international incident. The tunnel, David said. David, referring to his grandfather's Cold War escape route, leads to the waterfront. We can reach my boat within an hour. But Elizabeth made a surprising decision. I'm not running. David stopped. Elizabeth, these people are here to take you and Sophia. They won't, Elizabeth interrupted. Confidence impossible given their circumstances. Because I have something they need, and they have something I want. What could you possibly want from them? The truth about what really happened to my mother. The secure communication system crackled to life. A cultured, intelligent, utterly cold voice filled the room. Elizabeth Parker Richardson, this is Dr. Marcus Helix. I believe we need to talk. David reached for controls, but Elizabeth gently pushed his hand away. Dr. Helix, I was wondering when you'd introduce yourself properly. You've caused quite a disturbance. The information you've released has created complications. Good, Elizabeth replied calmly. Complications happen when people discover truth about organizations operating in shadows for decades. There was a pause. You're remarkably like your mother, Elizabeth. Catherine was equally stubborn and equally brilliant. You knew my mother. I recruited her, Dr. Helix said without emotion. Catherine Richardson was the most gifted researcher I'd ever encountered. Her work on consciousness and intelligence enhancement could have revolutionized human potential. Instead, she chose to run rather than see her research reach its full potential. Elizabeth felt anger building. She ran because you wanted to weaponize her work. She wanted to help people, not create super soldiers. Help people? Dr. Helix's laugh was bitter. Elizabeth, your mother's research could have eliminated learning disabilities, cured traumatic brain injuries, enhanced human intelligence beyond anything previously imagined. We could have created a world where every child had intellectual capacity to solve cancer, climate change, poverty. Instead, she hid her work and condemned millions to suffer. The argument was seductive. What if her mother had been wrong? What if benefits outweighed risks? But you would have controlled it, Elizabeth said finally. You would have decided who deserved enhancement and who didn't. You would have created a world divided between enhanced and unenhanced. Perhaps, Dr. Helix admitted, but at least it would have been a world where human potential wasn't limited by accidents of birth. David watched this philosophical battle amazedly. Elizabeth was matching one of the world's most manipulative minds, argument for argument. Dr. Helix, Elizabeth said, I'll make you a deal. I'm listening. I'll complete my mother's research. I'll finish the Parker theorem and develop practical applications. But I want something in return. What? Elizabeth's voice was steel. I want you to release my father and admit publicly that you've been operating illegally for decades. Full disclosure of your activities, your funding sources, your government connections. Everything. Dr. Helix was quiet for a long moment. And if I refuse? Then the research dies with me, Elizabeth said simply. You can have the notebooks. But without the family context, the personal references my mother embedded in her work, they're useless, and I'm the only person alive who can decode them. You would sacrifice billions of dollars and the chance to help millions of people out of spite. Not spite, Elizabeth replied, justice. My mother spent 12 years running from you. She died in poverty, unable to complete work that could have changed the world. Someone needs to pay for that. The silence stretched endlessly. Finally, Dr. Helix spoke again. You have 48 hours to consider my counteroffer, Elizabeth. We have your father. He's alive, but his continued well-being depends on your cooperation. Complete your mother's research for us, and you'll all be reunited as a family. Refuse, and Tom Parker disappears permanently. The communication cut off, leaving them in stunned silence. Elizabeth stared at the blank screen, her young face a mask of determination and barely controlled fury. The final confrontation was about to begin. 47 hours later, Elizabeth Parker Richardson stood in the abandoned warehouse where Dr. Helix had specified they meet. She carried a briefcase containing what appeared to be the completed Parker theorem, but her true plan was far more complex. David stood beside her, his protective instincts warring with respect for Elizabeth's brilliant strategy. Sophia was safely hidden with Mrs. Chen and a team of federal agents who'd been coordinating with Elizabeth for the past day. You came, Dr. Helix said, emerging from the shadows. He was tall, distinguished, with silver hair and eyes that held decades of calculated manipulation. Behind him stood 6 armed men and a figure that made Elizabeth's heart clench. Tom Parker looked terrible, thin, haunted, obviously coerced. But he was alive. Dad, Elizabeth whispered, years of anger and abandonment warring with relief. Elizabeth, Tom said, his voice breaking. I'm so sorry for everything, for leaving, for drinking, for being weak when you needed me strong. Touching, Dr. Helix interrupted coldly. Now, the research. Elizabeth held up the briefcase. First, I want to know exactly what happened to my mother. The truth, all of it. Dr. Helix smiled coldly. Catherine was brilliant but naive. She thought she could develop world-changing technology and keep it pure, untainted by reality. When she realized we intended to use her work for military applications, she stole her research and disappeared. You killed her, Elizabeth said quietly. We never touched her, Dr. Helix replied. Her death was genuine, complications during childbirth, but we've been watching your family ever since, waiting for the right moment to reclaim what was stolen from us." Elizabeth opened the briefcase, revealing notebooks filled with equations and a small device. "This is it, the completed Parker theorem, along with practical applications for consciousness enhancement." Dr. Helix's eyes gleamed with triumph. "Excellent! Now we can finally—" The device in the briefcase began beeping rapidly. "What is that?" Dr. Helix demanded. Elizabeth smiled, the first genuine smile she'd shown since entering the warehouse. "That's the sound of your entire organization being dismantled." The beeping stopped, and Dr. Helix's phone began ringing urgently. Then another phone. Then all of them. "Elizabeth, what have you done?" he asked, but his voice carried the first hint of uncertainty she'd heard. "I gave you exactly what you wanted," Elizabeth replied calmly. "The complete Parker theorem. But I also embedded a virus in the digital files that's currently uploading everything, every financial record, every classified document, every illegal operation you've conducted for the past 30 years, to news organizations, law enforcement agencies, and intelligence services in 47 countries. The warehouse doors burst open as federal agents flooded in, led by Detective Chen and a team of international law enforcement officials. "Dr. Marcus Helix," Detective Chen announced, "you're under arrest for racketeering, human trafficking, international conspiracy, and about 200 other charges that should keep you busy for the next several lifetimes." As the Helix Group operatives were led away in handcuffs, Elizabeth ran to her father. Tom Parker was broken, but he was alive, and for the first time in months, his eyes held clarity. "I'm sorry," he whispered again. Holding his daughter for the first time since her mother's death. "We're going to be okay, Dad," Elizabeth said softly. "All of us." 6 months later, Elizabeth Parker Richardson stood at the podium of the Nobel Prize ceremony in Stockholm. At 13, she was among the youngest recipients in history, and the youngest ever to win for breakthrough scientific research, honored not just for completing her mother's groundbreaking research, but for ensuring it would benefit all humanity rather than serve the interests of the powerful few. Sophia, now walking and babbling happily, sat in the audience between David and Tom Parker, who had completed rehabilitation and was slowly rebuilding his relationship with his daughters. The family wasn't perfect, but it was whole. In her acceptance speech, Elizabeth spoke about her mother's legacy, about the importance of using knowledge to lift up rather than control, and about the remarkable truth that sometimes the greatest discoveries come not from laboratories or universities, but from the courage of those who refuse to give up hope. "My mother, Dr. Catherine Richardson Parker, once wrote that intelligence without compassion is merely sophisticated cruelty," Elizabeth concluded. "Today, her research will help heal minds, expand human potential, and create a world where every child has the opportunity to reach their full capabilities." She would be proud to know that her work didn't just change science. It changed what it means to be human. As applause filled the concert hall, Elizabeth looked up at the ceiling and whispered, "This is for you, Mom. We did it." The homeless girl who had walked into a bakery begging for baby formula had become the brilliant young woman who changed the world. And she was just getting started.